Guys, super excited to have another guest on the show today. We got Grayson Mann. Grayson, introduce yourself, man.
What's up going on, guys? First of all, I want to thank you, Trotter, for having me on. I have listened to a couple of these episodes, and it's definitely going in the right direction. Very, very excited about it. But yeah, I'm Grayson Mann. I'm a Clemson student. I'm a junior sports communication major, and I'm the host of the Man with the Plan podcast. If you haven't listened to that, go ahead and check it out. And I'm an employee at Clemson Sports News. I work for the media, so a lot of exciting stuff here, and I'm very excited to talk some football with you, man.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Another podcaster joining on the show today. So you mentioned it. We've talked to Thomas Woods a little earlier on.
My guy.
So what difference is your job versus what Thomas's does on a week to week basis?
Yeah, so when I started with Gary, I was pretty much doing what Thomas is doing right now. And it's just kind of a progression type thing, just kind of getting data, running the message board, making sure everything flows. But as of right now, I have three main roles. It's a weekly story. So I write for the site, whether it's talking about the games, just kind of what I hear and what I see. I go to weekly press conferences with Thomas. He and I do that together. And then I do some game day coverage with our boss, Gary McDaniel, who runs the whole show. And then me and Gary also host a Friday show called CSN Live, where we're either on location or we're doing sponsorship stuff. It's really, really fun. And I think it's a perfect spot because he kind of lets us explore and it's
Mhm.
really a fun media and it's a big industry. And he kind of, as an intern, you don't really expect to do much as the logo goes. But yeah, he kind of lets us go out there and explore, let us make our mistakes, but also really cultivate these opportunities into something great.
Yeah, man, that sounds awesome. I definitely wish that that was something that, USC kind of had,
Mm-hmm.
something that is different from across universities, even if we are in the same state. So you mentioned you're a Clemson guy. It is
Oh yeah.
officially rivalry weekend in college
Woo!
football.
That's right.
Personally, I'm feeling good. We're coming off a win against Tennessee. As a Clemson man, as a student, kind of what's the vibe around campus? Obviously, we're on Thanksgiving break now. We're in the house away off of campus, but kind of what was the vibe like after win over Miami for Clemson and a big upset for USC?
So yeah, I'm watching the Miami game, and I'm in the back of my mind. We're with Clemson fans right now, especially after the Notre Dame loss. We've been thinking about, okay, you start looking ahead of the schedule, you start looking at certain teams, you go, okay, who needs to lose at this point? And I was actually joking with a buddy that actually went to USC. We're like, oh, it can't be Tennessee, can it? Because they got you would say the easiest path with Carolina and Vanderbilt. They just have to not lose. So we kind of discarded it as a joke. But once you start to see South Carolina winning, we're like, ooh, okay. And it's kind of weird as Clemson fans, we are all rooting for the Gamecocks. And it was like, wow, this is kind of odd.
Yeah.
But I think the vibe on campus is this is one of the first games in a long time for a lot of students that Carolina's knocking on the door. They're doing something right with Shane Beamer. And I think last year you kind of smelt blood in the water, but it was also they had their third string coming in. Clemson was starting to do well. They had won five straight at the time. So it's kind of really exciting with them coming back to campus, coming back to Clemson for the first time since 2018. So there's a lot of built up energy. First time for a lot of students for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you kind of mentioned it that last year there was this sense of like, okay, like maybe Carolina can pull off the upset. Obviously, it ended up not quite going our way, but I think a lot of people around Columbia, there's a bunch of belief that maybe we could pull it off. I think 2 weeks ago after the Florida game, I don't think there was any belief anywhere. People were riding off the season. It was fire Marcus Satterfield, bench Rattler, get them all out of the system. But I think after Saturday's game, there's a lot of momentum. College football is such a crazy game as it ebbs and flows throughout the season. I got a guy I listen to a podcaster. He calls it the roller coaster of emotions. And I really think that sums up. I think it sums up a college football season so well. 12 weeks is a long time, but at the same time, I mean, I feel like it was August just a couple weeks
I
ago, and we
know.
were we
Yeah.
were getting ready to rock and roll. So we kind of touched on it. We think it's going to be different. Exactly, kind of what differences are you expecting in this Clemson Carolina game this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, isn't that what's great about college football? Is that 2 weeks ago you're just in like this pit of despair, and now 2 weeks later you're like, oh, we could put on back-to-back monumental wins for the program, and I think that's the same for Clemson after the Notre Dame game. You're kind of like, oh man, going to fall short of what our expectations were. But now 2 weeks later, we're saying, hey, we might have a shot. That's just what I love
Absolutely.
about college football. It's
Absolutely.
awesome. Yeah, but
Best.
what makes this game different, and I think for both teams especially, there's stakes on the line. For Clemson, there's a shot back in the postseason, keeping that streak going. I think I looked at some research for a story I did this week for CSN, and this is the Clemson 7 game win streak is currently tied for a win streak all the way back in the 1930s. I think it was 1934 to 1940, which is ridiculous to just kind of with how long this rivalry's gone on. But yeah, Carolina's got a stake in this. Clemson has a stake in this. For Carolina, I'd argue a win over Clemson in Death Valley would be 10 times better than a win against Tennessee just because of what it would mean for the state championship, the recruiting. You get to like pretty much talk about it all year, regardless of how Clemson finishes their season. You have that bragging right. You have that. It feels personal.
Mhm.
So I think that I like what Shane Beamer's doing. I'm a believer in Beamer ball. I know that's kind of sacrilegious for me to say as a Clemson fan, but I think there's a lot for both teams on the line, especially given the circumstances, especially after the Tennessee game, because Clemson, ironically, their biggest enemy in college football, might have just given them new life in the playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke with Thomas on Sunday, jokingly about rivalry week, and he said with all due respect, I hate the Gamecocks, but I was rooting hard for them last night, and that was something I'd never thought I'd hear Thomas Wood say.
Never,
So,
never.
kind of talking about the Tigers now, there's been a lot of quarterback controversy the last couple
Mhm.
of years, and we saw DJ struggle again last weekend. What are your thoughts on the quarterbacking position? Are you sold on DJ, or are you part of the fan base that's ready to move on to the next?
I think that I was talking to my dad actually about this. We were rewatching the NC State game today because we just had the internet was out, so we just had to go to the DVR to see what was available.
Mhm.
And we were watching the NC State game. I looked at him and I went, regardless of how this finishes, the era with TJ is going to be one of the strangest ones in Clemson football, just because of everything that's happened in the last 2 years. It feels like everything's coming down on him. And I got to tell you one thing, Trotter, the team absolutely loves this guy. Regardless of what's been thrown at him, he hasn't changed a shade. He's been a really great leader, and I think he could throw 5 interceptions. I think these guys would speak the highest of him. The way he handled the Syracuse game, I think everyone was very impressed about that. I mean, we have examples of quarterbacks handling certain things badly. Like look at Zach Wilson with the Jets. You
Mhm.
can say the wrong thing in one press conference, and you can lose an entire locker room. So he's saying all the right things. He's doing all the right things. I don't think Clemson's in this spot with a shot in the playoff without DJ, because you have games like Wake Forest where he has to put up 54, or NC State where he's got to lead the charge against a team that beat them last year. And so there's been moments where he struggled, sure, but I think overall, I think you just let him finish it out, whatever the future may hold. I think on his best day, he can compete with the best, but on his worst days, you got to kind of watch out and rely on that run game, which is why Klubnik has had to come in a couple times.
Yeah, I agree. Spencer Rattler was asked in an interview on Tuesday, kind of what were his thoughts on the whole thing, and Rattler said that he thought that the whole controversy was a lot similar to what he saw at Oklahoma, where Rattler was this 7-0 starter and loses. Not It doesn't even lose the game, has a bad half against Texas, and they're throwing him to the wolves, dumping him into the toilet and benching him for the rest of the season. Rattler said that he was very impressed with how he's handled it. Obviously, I think a lot of the country isn't really talking about it, but he's a very professional guy who goes about his business, and it doesn't really matter what's being said about him on social media, what's being said about him around the country. He continues to perform, and I think it's very interesting that we have these standards in college football where Clemson has one loss and their offense is top 25 in the country still, and they're yelling to
Yep.
bench the quarterback. You look at the same thing with Alabama. They've got two really close losses to two really good teams, and people are saying to fire the whole staff, get everybody out. Like I think these are just standards that we're seeing around college football for so long that it's just very, very interesting to see kind of, as a Gamecock fan, if we're 10-1 going into last week of the season, we're storming 5 points. We're having way too much fun, enjoying our lives. So I think it's just very interesting to see, kind of as a fan of a mediocre team, to see how the fans of a really, really great team kind of interact with their coaches, their players. So I kind of just spoke about this.
Yeah.
I spoke with Thomas a little bit about how he thought maybe some of the offensive struggles are more on the offensive coordinator, Brandon Streeter, and potentially a little bit on Tony Elliott last year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I going back to what your expectations say, it's kind of crazy how like you go 10-1. This is Clemson's 12th straight 10-win season. And if you ask a couple people on campus, you probably wouldn't know it based on how they're reacting to certain situations. So there's been a lot that's been accomplished this year. And most programs, like you said, if Carolina was 10-1, if like Tennessee, for example, they finish 11-2, that's a fantastic year for their program. Michigan's been okay with Harbaugh winning 10 straight games or 10 having 10-win seasons, excuse me, despite the fact that he hasn't been able to beat Ohio State all the time. But yeah, to go back on your question about the offensive coordinator, it was a new era for Clemson football. They had you lose Tony Elliott, who was running the ship for a couple of years with Jeff Scott, and then he kind of took over. Brett Venables goes off to Oklahoma. But yeah, I do want to add the Brandon Streeter for the first 7 games, he put up the most points in any Dabo Sweeney team. So that's just something that people want to note. But yeah, there have been struggles, and I think there's been struggles on both sides of the ball. But I think it's also about the coordinators finding themselves and kind of making it their own. So it's really a difficult transition to make going from passing game to being the head honcho of the offense. And my biggest criticism of Brandon Streeter so far is I think he finds the right notes and then he starts to slowly abandon them over time. And that's when you can see drives stall out in the second and third quarter because they sometimes start out super fast. Like you saw against in the Miami game, they go out 10 straight points. DJ's on fire, making reads, and then they kind of abandon it, take their foot off the gas. I think Streeter's at his best when he's really pushing the issue and he's being really aggressive. And sometimes he doesn't do that, but I don't know if that's him being unsure of himself or that's something he's got to learn to do over time.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's funny how we're sitting here and you're saying that Streeter's really good at starting the game. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, I wish Marcus Satterfield could learn how to start a game. You're sitting here saying that Streeter doesn't know how to finish a game, but the Gamecocks have prided themselves all season on being a second half team.
Right.
If we could just combine the two, we'd have a heck of an offensive coordinator.
Sure.
So Marcus we've talked about it. Yeah, exactly. Right. We put it together. We'll make our own team. We've talked about it. Let's go ahead and dive into a prediction. I'm going to give mine tomorrow on the show, but I'd love to hear yours. Clemson, Carolina, Saturday in Death Valley. Who's going to get the win and why?
Okay, so yeah, I think my prediction slightly changed. And just because of the Tennessee game, I didn't want to exactly jump into the hype. And I got to be careful here because I'm talking to a South Carolina fan. But I think this game's going to be close in the first half just because with any rivalry game, there's going to be emotion. There's going to be the stakes are going to be high. I think everyone understands the urgency of how this game was going to go. I think Rattler and DJ have a little bit of a first half duel. I could really see it being 14-17 going into the first half with kind of everyone's trading blows or kind of figuring each other out because at South Carolina, this is a good South Carolina team, I feel, that can get hot at the right time. And we just saw at Tennessee. If Spencer Rattler has time, it's going to be an unbelievable difference maker. And I think that's what kind of gives Clemson the edge here is they got a much better defensive line when they're healthy than Tennessee, being able to put pressure on Rattler, forcing him to be a little uncomfortable, putting him behind the chains. I think that's where the X factor lies is if Rattler has any time, this is a young secondary back there with Clemson. And despite the fact that they had Makuba and Sheridan Jones, they could get in some trouble there. But I think Clemson takes this one. I'm going to say 31-20. I think this is going to be not as highly scoring, but I think Clemson takes over late in the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, as a South Carolina fan, we've struggled to even put points on the board. So I think for a lot of the fan base, if we're being really realistic with each other, challenging the Tigers this year needs to be the goal. Maybe next year at home in Williams-Brice is the year that we can really maybe have a go at you guys. But, I agree. I think it's going to be a close game, especially coming off of that unbelievable win on Saturday night against Tennessee. I think that the first half, you're right, is probably going to be a really close one. But I think that it's going to come down to turnovers in the second half, and whichever team can benefit the most from not turning the ball over and maybe stealing a possession or two is definitely gonna have the last laugh and eventually be the winner of the game.
Yeah, I really like to see Clemson run the ball effectively in this game, especially given Carolina. I think where are they ranked 120th in run defense. If correct me if I'm wrong, there way down there. Get Shipley involved early, really get DJ comfortable because this could be a big game, and you're going to want to use DJ when you need him, especially if there's a close first half. You're going to need him to make some big time throws. Bo Collins is going to be back. That's going to be a huge add for this wide receiver group. There's just a lot of things that Clemson can do. It's just I'm not sure which direction they're going to take it. I saw a funny, I guess you call it a meme there. It said Clemson and Carolina fans have been kind of chilling on the smack talk because we have no idea which version of our teams are going to show up. So
That's
you
very
could
true.
see a Clemson team that struggles to move the ball, but keeps it kind of close, or the team that comes out like they did against Wake Forest and it's airing it out.
Hmm.
So you could see a multitude of things. I don't know what Streeter's seeing on film, but I think it's going to be a feeling out process in the first half, and then I'll be able to comfortably say where this is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, in Columbia, we there's the kind of the joking nickname of the cardiac Gamecocks. You know, your heart is just all over the place. You never know what to expect going in. Maybe it's Florida Gamecocks, maybe it's Tennessee. Who knows? I'm definitely hoping for Tennessee. But we're gonna get away from the Clemson Carolina stuff.
Yep,
I pride myself on trying to cover all things as unbiased as possible.
absolutely.
Obviously, there's a little bias in there when I talk about my Gamecocks, but we're going to talk about now in your podcast. You talk a lot about the NFL and you dive into kind of how the NFL is broken down.
Yep.
So I'm a more of a college athletics podcast personally. What college players right now are you seeing and looking at as your top guys going into this year's draft?
Man, that's a really great question because a lot of that goes into the work of the offseason. But as you're watching, you start to kind of register some players within your mind. And this is a big quarterback class. This is one of those like last year was relatively a weaker one. I think Kenny Pickett's really the only one. Bailey Zappi, Malik Willis, and Kenny Pickett are really the only ones that have gotten some playing time. But you look at a guy like Bryce Young, who's been touted as the guy. CJ Stroud coming out of Ohio State, especially with Justin Fields playing as he's playing right now. I think it's given some fans a lot of confidence that, hey, maybe this Ohio State quarterback, it's like a stereotype. Ohio State quarterbacks, they play well in the system, they go in the NFL, they tend to struggle a little bit. You got a guy like Will Levis, who I haven't been particularly as high on. I see him more as a second round pick. And you got Hooker, who's come out of nowhere, Bo Nix, who's had a really great season at Oregon, especially turning it around after the Georgia game. But these are some guys that I've been looking at. I look at Jordan Addison from USC. I think he could really come and help a wide receiver needy team. I look at a guy like Brian Brazier, Miles Murphy from Clemson, that I think they're going to get picked up, or Trent Simpson, especially in the top 15. And there's just a lot of players across the country. I'm not sure that Josh Downs is necessarily going to the NFL just yet, but he's a guy, once he's draft eligible, I've definitely got my eye on. And then there's Anthony Richardson. I think he's a project kind of quarterback, but he's someone that if he can refine his passing, something you really need to watch out for because this guy can take off in a second's notice. He's like a Cam Newton in a sense, where there's some issues that he needs to work out within the passing game. But yeah, he's a monster on the field, especially when he gets going. And then a running back, I feel like I keep rambling, but there's so many names and so much information. Blake Corum from Michigan. I really want to see where he lands. I would love to see him land in Baltimore and kind of with Lamar Jackson kind of master with that offense. So those are just a lot of laundry list of names that I've been able to watch so far.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, the more knowledge, the better. We're
Yeah.
always trying to learn here at Next Gen Athletics. It's very interesting that you brought up Will Levis. I've gone on the show before and voiced my own opinions about Will Levis. I am not a believer. I'll be really
Mm-hmm.
honest. I never understood the hype. I feel like he's kind of proved me right this year. I'm not trying to prey on the man's downfall. Go
That's
get your
right.
bag, young sir. Do your thing. Go. He's gonna have a great NFL career regardless. He's gonna make a lot more money than me probably. But I've not been sold on him all year. I understand he's got the build, he's got the length and the strength, but I feel like his decision making and sometimes his accuracy just is underwhelming and overhyped a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think you look at certain quarterbacks that kind of pop off in terms of the measurables and the intangibles, but when you really come down to the nitty gritty, and I think there's a Josh Allen syndrome that a lot of people are starting to pick up on, is you get this big giant build of a quarterback that's got all the talent in the world, but they're kind of raw mechanically. You try to bring them in and go, okay, yeah, we can definitely fix this guy, and it can be like Josh Allen, but I think a lot of people don't understand is what Josh Allen had to do to kind of refine that because his first 2 years in the NFL were really sloppy. And this third year started to really click and figure it out. It takes a process and it takes a team willing to be patient enough and the player himself being willing to work on those mechanics as he transitions to the NFL. So there's a lot of these players out there that are going to get picked up because of him. And it may not work out, but maybe it does. I don't want to be too super negative on the show, but that's just been my thoughts and opinions as the seasons progressed.
Of course. I mean, great knowledge we're learning here. We're stretching our arms into the NFL today. I love to see it. We're moving into the last regular season week. We've got obviously playoffs can have have an implication rivalry week. A lot of teams looking to spoil parties, lots of teams looking to extend their arms and really kind of grasp that playoff. What are your 4 teams, if you had to pick today, what are your 4 teams and then your national champion to be
Ooh.
crowned in January?
So, Trotter, there's the once and then there's the actual reality. Like the once, I'd love to be able to put Clemson in there and slide them in, but that's a couple things that have to happen first. Let's do that. I'm going to give you 2 separate versions because I don't want to say
Okay.
that Clemson makes it in the playoffs because I know someone will be out there and be like, oh,
I
so
don't want to make the boss mad.
oh goodness, my phone just like fell out of my pocket. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but so my version of like the actual my reality. I think that's going to be Georgia and Ohio State. Those are my locks regardless at 1 and 2. And then I'm going to put TCU at 3 because I think they're going to be able to win out and figure it. Max Duggan, Quentin Johnson. That's a duo that I've really been excited about. And then I think at my 4, I'm going to slide in USC. And I think they're a really interesting team just because the way they're able to move the ball. But I think they could run into a matchup problem with Georgia. And eventually that offense is going to get shut down. But can that defense shut anybody out? So there's that big question: big offense, weak defense, and kind of how that plays against a Georgia team that's really well balanced. And then there's my fantasy scenario where Clemson gets in and they play Georgia, and that 3 kind of stays the same. It really hinges on USC whether they can win out. But ultimately, regardless of my scenario, I think Georgia is going to win the national championship this year. I think whether it's Ohio State, whether it's TCU, whether it's a team, I think Georgia, when they're at their best, they're almost better than they were last year. And I don't know how that's possible because they had one of the best rosters in college football. Stetson Bennett has really stepped up as a passer. They can run the football, they can create turnovers on defense. The injury to Nolan Smith worries me, but I think they have just enough, and they're going to have a home playoff game in Atlanta. That's going to get them a nice, easy win, I would say. And even if it's Clemson, I hate to say it, I don't know if Clemson matching up against Georgia, that really scares me if I'm a Clemson fan. So those are my top 4s, and then there's my national championship outright.
Awesome. I mean, I think, I've said it on the show before that I think that Georgia is just miles above everybody else. At the beginning of the year, I'd picked the upset in Columbia. I went on the record and I said it, and they came to Columbia, and quite frankly, just like everybody else they've played, they embarrassed the Gamecocks in front of a sold out crowd. Like you said, as crazy as it is, they're almost better than that team they had last year. That defense is almost just as good, if not better, which is something incredible to say when you think that they drafted 10 players off of that team or something like that. Something just unbelievable. Kirby Smart has done a great job down there in Athens. Grayson, it's been a pleasure to have you
always,
on.
man.
Where
Absolutely.
can my people find you on social media and keep in touch with you?
Absolutely. So my Instagram and Twitter handles are at Gray_man21. I think it's 21 on both. But if you just search Gray_man, or even just search Grayson and Clemson, you'll probably be able to find it somewhere. But yeah, those are my 2 handles that I'll probably most likely to respond. And then I guess Snapchat, if any of your listeners use that too, Gray_man20. But mostly Instagram and Twitter, especially if anyone wants to reach out and do something collaboration wise or just ask me a question. Always will loving to do that. And then, hey, if you want to check out another podcast, before you got to subscribe to Next Gen Athletics first. But you gotta come visit the Man with the Plan podcast when you have the time.
Absolutely, man. We appreciate you being on the show today. Hey, go Gamecocks, beat the Tigers this weekend. It's gonna happen. I'm feeling good.
Don't end the show like that, man.
Hey, I'm gonna go Cox. But hey, for real, on a totally serious note, guys, round of applause for Grayson. I appreciate you coming on the show, man. We're always looking to expand and get better and give my creators, my listeners, the best content. So I appreciate you coming on today, man.
I got to get one of those hats, so you got to let me know when those are available.
I'll send you a link or something. I'll get you on.
There we go.
All right, man. Appreciate you. Have a good one.
Yes, sir.